Okay. Well, good morning. My name is Sheila Lamb, and I'm with the Virginia SBDC Network. For those of you that are not familiar with our organization, the Virginia Small Business Development Center is a partnership program between the U.S. Small Business Administration, George Mason University, and local host institutions throughout Virginia. With 27 locations across the Commonwealth, we provide training and technical assistance to small businesses in their local communities. Our one-on-one advising services are available at no charge. Today's webinar, Marrying Form and Function, Designing a Useful, Compelling Space for Your Craft Beverage Business, is presented by the Virginia SBDC Network. We are recording today's presentation and it will be posted on our website, virginiasbdc.org. Due to the large number of participants, everyone's microphone is muted, but if you have questions during the presentation, you can type those into the Q&A box. We have also enabled the live transcript function, which you can show or hide via your own reading controls. And now it's my pleasure to introduce the Virginia SBDC Craft Beverage Assistance Program Manager, Chris Van Orden.
All right, thank you so much, Sheila. Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us for this conversation about creating a functional, appealing space for your craft beverage business. Again, my name is Chris Van Orden, and I'm the manager of the Craft Beverage Assistance Program at the Virginia SBDC at George Mason University. The CBA program is designed to provide industry-specific guidance to Virginia's craft beverage sector. Today's program will be a free-flowing conversation on creating a technically demanding space that's appealing to customers. You can enter any questions you have in the Q&A function. We'll do our best to answer them either during or after the webinar. So I'm excited to introduce my speaker today, Christopher Peli. As Senior Job Captain at CORE Design and Architecture, he is involved in many diverse project types from hospitality to urban design, renovation, and new construction. And I'm really excited that he's lending his expertise today. Welcome, Christopher.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So before we sort of dive into the questions that I've got for you here, can you give us just a sense of CORE's work? You know, there's no need to name specific names if there's client confidentiality, that kind of thing. But what types of clients do you serve and what kind of services do you provide?
The standard pitch, which is that CORE is a multidisciplinary architectural and design firm. We're based in Georgetown. We work on a vast number of sectors in and around DC, Virginia, and Maryland. Anything like you say, hospitality, bar and restaurant, maker spaces, retail, entertainment. A lot of different building types, from new construction, adaptive reuse, a little bit of preservation and restoration, just because in the DC area there's a lot of that, and multifamily residential, mixed use. It's really a wide variety, and that's I think our asset is to not be sort of pigeonholed into kind of one typology. So while you have the expertise in certain areas and sectors, it's also important to kind of have a little bit of knowledge of everything kind of going on around you, which I think lends itself well to what we do.
Absolutely. So you work with, in this space, you have both the sort of help companies with, breweries, wineries, cideries, distilleries, both in kind of like brand new buildings, but just as often in those really interesting, unique spaces that, might be hard to kind of match the technical demands of production into. Yeah.
And I think that, we sort of see ourselves as a little bit more as guides than sort of designers. So a lot of people think that your architect or your designer kind of give them what you want, and then they sort of go behind the curtain, and then they come back out and it's like, ta-da, here's your design. We focus on co-creating with their our clients, focusing on all the different ways that we can improve the brand, improve your functionality. How do we make sure that you're not getting in the way of yourself in the future? And then, site selection is really a super critical one, because as a maker or a craft beverage, whatever it is, generally that kind of product is made out in an industrial park somewhere out on the outskirts of town where it's easy to distribute, it's easy to get product out, and rent is cheap, probably buy something. But you're not getting a lot of foot traffic out there, out next to Dulles Airport. And you're certainly not having a lot of the same foot traffic that you get in a city, right? So, the opposite of that is that you can open up in the middle of DC or, wherever, an urban environment anywhere, and you get a lot of that foot traffic. You get a lot of you can afford to be open 7 days a week and have a tasting room or have a bar that's part of your space, but you're going to be dealing with a lot of the traffics that come with being in a city, which is that you're probably going to have to rent your space. It's probably not made for what you're trying to do there, and you are going to face some zoning issues that are really, you're going to be competing against, sort of swimming against the stream in a lot of ways to do what you want to do, depending on jurisdiction, of course. So that's why I think that you could have somebody who's just sort of a very technical expert in how to make your functionality of your process flow from raw product to sellable retail product or whatever it is, but having sort of institutional knowledge of how the rest of the how the rest of the city, how the building that you may be going into, if it's mixed use, how does that function? What are the different things that you need to look for to make sure that you can do what you're trying to do effectively and efficiently happens.
Yeah, that's always the balancing act of, high traffic, but often high cost and often some technical issues, and versus maybe more kind of suitable spaces, but the foot traffic is not the same. So no single right answer. I think everyone in attendance here has probably thought through this, and as long as it fits your business model, that's really the name of the game. So you mentioned that you all get involved or can be an asset during the site selection process. So let's talk about new sites, companies that are going into new spaces. Can you run us through the process, what that might look like for somebody embarking on a project? Like when should they engage the services of a firm like CORE?
I would say as soon as possible, early, for us at least. That's where our sort of expertise can be initially helpful. Is what are the zoning laws? Are you in a zone that doesn't allow production or manufacturing? In DC, for instance, there's a certain PDR zone that allows for that kind of space to be to use that way. Are you allowed to have a bar inside of your production space? The PDR zones often can not allow for performance, live performance or entertainment. So if you're interested in having, as sort of what happens with these sort of craft beverage spaces, is they end up kind of becoming a community center in a way first, because what do you have? You have a bunch of space, and everyone wants to have their weddings and bar mitzvahs and everything there. What other programming are you planning for, and is that allowed? And then again, that's sort of when you're in town, if you will. You can just as well have a model where your main production facility is out, somewhere sort of out of the city. Not a problem with that. It's just sort of a question of how do you want to do it? Do you want to have this sort of wheel and spoke where you've got the mothership, which is making all the product, and then you've got sort of the satellite bar concepts, the tap room kind of concepts, where maybe you're doing a couple of barrels on site, but most of that is coming from from sort of mothership. Is that your model, and how does that work versus, no, we want to have everything here. We want to have it all in town. We're an urban distillery, whatever it happens to be. And we want to make sure that we're making everything on site. Distilleries have that, they have that sort of choice to make as to whether or not you're purchasing neutral spirits and bringing that in and just sort of finishing. It's a much easier way to do something like that in an urban environment, in town, and you have to fire up the still and worry about blowing up the block. But at the same time, is that part of your model? Is that part of your brand? So I would say that, because all of those different questions need to be answered first before you can select a site, gotta have somebody, that can help, to lead you the way, to figure out those questions. Maybe you already have answers to them. But the site selection really is critical to what kind of model do you want to go after? What's really your long-term plan for your business?
Yeah, that makes sense to have that, somebody before they've signed on that lease, they need to have that, business model in hand, and the SBDCs, I'll do the plug. We are here to help you with that. But have a vision as to what you're hoping to achieve. And then when you're going through and evaluating properties, I'll tell you, definitely worked with plenty of companies over the years that have signed on to a space and then realize afterwards why they got it for such a good deal, or why other people have passed on it or vacated that space. And it can be as simple as, the loading bay isn't big enough, or you can't actually get a truck backed up to it because of the angle, or the floors can't hold enough weight, right? Those kinds of things, avoiding those headaches through an expert, never mind the zoning laws, and there's lots of those involved. So having, an expert on hand to be able to, be your advocate in that space is really helpful.
We before you sign a lease anywhere, we often ask that you send us your tenant, the work letter, your make sure that you have enough tenant improvement money from the landlord. Look at what they're providing. Is it enough? Are you on the hook for all of the utility upgrades? Are they promising you a certain capacity of your structure? Or are they giving you 30 days or something like that to get an expert in there to actually look at it, figure that out, and then go back to them? You may have something like that in the contract with the landlord, and then you sort of miss it because you've waited to assemble your design team until after you've already started the sort of real estate path. And if you can get the right people involved early, make sure that you're not sort of on the hook for some of those things. Those, they're basic building improvements, and these are things that landlords should be paying for. But reading the contract and understanding very thoroughly whether or not what you'll get to in design and construction, whether that's something that you need to be budgeting for or not. So I would say that there's a lot of developers and landlords are very interested in this kind of this sort of sector, this sort of kind of use being in their buildings. It's a huge draw. Everybody likes right, a bar is a bar. It's like, okay, what makes it special? Well, back in the day, everybody, it would just be like some random pub or something like that, and they would have a tap on the tap handle that said, this is our house lager.
Mm-hmm.
And everybody knew that was like an Anheuser-Busch product that they were just allowed to put their own brand on. You're not really gonna mash tun in the basement. Like, let's just be honest with ourselves. And that sort of shell game, is something that you still are interested in. Your landlords, developers, they kind of don't really care less what your model is, as long as you are, you are the brand, you're Solace or whoever it is. Well, we've got this maker. We're not just somebody who's It was just, got somebody else's stuff on draft. This is like part of our local, our local businesses.
Yeah.
Aren't we good people? And that's not to say that they're not. And it's great that that's something that's promoted in both new and existing developments. The issue is sort of there's a sort of gap of knowledge. What do we need to provide to actually make this a hospitable, reasonably functioning place for for craft beverage makers? And again, it kind of comes down to that same thing. It's that model of is this a outpost, a brew pub outpost of yours? Are you're really doing production here? I think DC is getting better at DC developers are getting better at again, I sort of go back 15 years ago or so, building office buildings all over town, and nobody knew everybody wanted a restaurant. It was like, well, we're going to have, retail is sort of dying. We're going to get restaurants into our ground floors to sort of activate our buildings, and because it's amenity. And very few developers actually sort of either had the design teams that were doing the building or knew what to actually provide in order to get just a restaurant. It's commercial hood, and you've got smells, and you've got loading and trash and everything else. Now we're kind of on that leading edge of trying to get craft makers, beverage makers into the spaces, and there's still that sort of learning curve that needs to happen. Doing the bare minimum for a loading dock based on whatever the zoning says you need to do is usually not going to cut it for the kind of use that we're talking about. The regular residential building loading dock or commercial office building that only handles paper trash is just not going to, it's not going to handle what comes out of production facilities. So we like to, again, if you're in early, we can be a help and an arbiter to make sure that both parties get what they want. That's really ultimately that's the goal.
It's it's not any benefit to the landlord if their tenant can't be successful in that space. And some of it comes to knowing the which pointed questions to ask, right? So evaluating that space, and whether it's because the landlord themselves don't know, or they're trying to put it on the tenant for those improvements to make the space workable for the intended use. Every brewery, winery, cidery, distillery bumps up against so many other issues, and it's impossible to know everything you need to know about your product and your industry, as well as architecture and design, as well as accounting, all of these things. There's experts out there, so rely on them as much as possible. And if it saves you the effort of having to go through and you're on the hook for the required electrical upgrade or reinforcing floors, that will justify the early engagement. So, but all of which is to say, so you don't need to, when you're going to go work with a firm like CORE, that you don't have to come in saying, here's the building, I've got the lease signed. What information, whether technical, aesthetic, business, whatever, should a producer have in hand before engaging a firm like CORE or someone like you, and what can they expect you all to provide kind of in those early stages?
Rarely does someone walk in the door and say, I'm going to open a winery. We're like, well, what do you want to make? I don't know. Everyone knows what they've got a vision before you even get to where you're making the phone call or even talking to you guys, some kind of vision. So our initial sort of meetings and conversations are really just all about listening to what you have to say, listening to it's your hopes and dreams. I mean, it's you're putting everything on the line for that. Like we're here to help facilitate and guide that process. I don't think I've ever heard anybody that just said, well, I want to open a brewery, but I don't know anything about brewing. So you got, everyone knows that you know what you want to do, you know your craft, and most likely you're already doing it. You're just doing it in some tiny space, whether it's at home or you've got some micro nano facility, whatever we're calling the sort of whatever the level below micro is your nano brewery is somewhere in a storage unit, on Bladensburg or something. And so you've got a sense of where you want to go and what to do with it. It's those other questions about, well, have you looked at, do you have a broker? Are you looking for, how are you looking? And then maybe you're trying to buy something. It's not out of the question. We're looking at St. Freud right now. And I cleared it with them that I could talk about this, but they're purchasing a building in Tacoma Park, and that's urban. That's in the city. It's pretty much in the city, right? And for having the ability to kind of do that, try to scale up the way that they're doing, and be able to purchase and not be sort of beholden to somebody else's property is it's doable in 2022, amazingly. So you're I guess you've got your business plan, you know where you want to go with it. It's a lot of the first steps are just having conversations.
Yeah. So coming to someone like you and saying, not necessarily asking you all to weigh in on the business plan, but make it clear, hey, here's our model, right? We are a tap room first, very, very limited distribution, small scale, really focus on this, and maybe even going into some of the brand identity aspect of it, of ideally at that you want to build a space that aligns with whatever brand you're developing. So, hey, we're really modern, we're appealing for a younger crowd, or we're going for a very traditional setting, or we're a winery and we want to have an attached restaurant. So we're going for high end, that, right? In the countryside, we want to be a destination for weekend people. So coming in with information like that to someone like you, and as well as like making it clear what other partners are already enlisted. So if you have that broker, great. If you already have your logo fully fleshed out, great. If you have, where are you on your capital side, right? I mean, I think I'm sure there's always, no company is ever going to say, oh, I spent way less money than I wanted to.
Unless they're laundering something.
Yeah. There's always, it's an expensive industry. There's no getting around it. But being upfront about budgets, I assume is really helpful for you, about, whether you can help someone to determine whether it's attainable, saying, hey, I want to open up in, downtown Charlottesville. I'm going to have this major production facility with an attached restaurant. My budget's $100,000.
Yep. That I would tell you that you should be looking at second generation spaces.
Mm-hmm.
I think you should be, we sort of tell this to bar and restaurant, but restaurateurs that are looking to expand, and they're trying to do it on a low budget. What was opened 10 years ago? What opened 10 years ago that's now, on a 10-year lease that's coming up? And are they moving, closing, green hat, just sort of closed, and now there's a distilling facility right in Ivy City that's just ready, full of equipment. Whether or not it's still full of, what it's sort of sold the parts off or not, but that happens.
Mm-hmm.
And it happens on cycles. So if you're interested in a certain location, kind of go snooping around, find out who opened 5 or 10 or 15 years ago, whose lease is probably coming up, or they had an 8-year and a +2 option they're not taking. That's your best bet for trying to find something where all you need to do is come in and paint it, put your logo up, and maybe some new tables and chairs or something like that, changes tap handles, and you're in business. That's about all you can do for $100,000. barely
Mhm.
pay your architect for that. Just kidding. So
Yeah.
that's where you're sort of the lowest end of that spectrum. The other side of it is that you can buy a building, you're you're going to be there. You're also looking at that equity obviously that comes with it, and maybe in 15 or 20 years you've outgrown that space and you're moving to some facility that's out in Frederick, and you can be a landlord to some up and coming other craft beverage maker that can just come in and everything's set up and ready for them. They're just not to that scale. We're not on that second generation yet. We're coming around to it, right? In this area, there's just been such an explosion of craft beverage makers in the past, again, kind of 10, 15 years, that next generation is going to start happening here soon. So, be on the lookout for that happening, either outgrowing or just deciding to fold a 3-star. Unfortunately, 3 stars just kind of said, we're gonna hang it up, and there's a facility right there. It's at the end of a dirt road. That's a dead end. It's not like the greatest foot traffic, but if your model is just making, it already has a presence, and the geography is sort of getting there. I guess I don't know if the road's still a dirt road. It was the last time I was up there. It was pretty gravelly, but that's DC's problem. That's how it's, but you got to kind of think about that kind of thing, right? So yeah, that's kind of what I would say. The two opposite extremes, are just sort of like, are you able to jump into another? It's like a hermit crabs, they sort of like they all go to the next size shell up. If we've got a good community of makers here that are doing it, they'll be able to help kind of the smaller makers come up into those other spaces that are now in their second, third generations coming down the pipe.
Yeah, it's a good point. Just being on the lookout, being aware of what's happening in your target area. Leases come due, and it doesn't have to necessarily be something already in this sector, but knowing kind of what might be coming online in advance, it's a great option if you're not necessarily, you don't have the capital to go in and start with a new construction. So that is a good, there's a couple of like A or B questions in that space. Are we talking about a new building or a purpose-built building, or are we talking about creative reuse? Are we talking about owners and renters, new companies versus existing companies going to new facilities? So if you can kind of go into some of that. But actually, before we jump in, there was a question that came up that's kind of relevant to that. There's someone who's going to be building a distillery brewery tasting room in a new construction scenario. That'll have a big distribution component, but as well as some on-site consumer experience, some on-premise stuff. And so they're thinking about the fire code, the build out side of it, different uses in a space. Is it in those types of scenarios, is it beneficial for breaking things out across unique buildings? And obviously when you get into some of these things, business entities and licenses, or are there efficiencies to be gained by having everything kind of under one roof?
Certainly there's efficiencies to having everything under the same roof. The question about the building itself, you're going to want to be in there's not to get super technical into the type 1 construction, type 1 and 2 construction, non-combustible building construction, concrete, steel mostly, are sort of that's where you kind of want to be. Not that you can't do it in an old row house in Georgetown or something like that with masonry and wood construction, but not for the sort of scale and size that I think question Asker was sort of talking about. When it depends on if it's a multi-use building as well. I would kind of go back to whether that building is satisfying all your loading requirements. Do you need grain silos? I mean, is there, what kind of storage is happening? And are you're either that's, it's good, maybe it's purpose built. And that information just, you know, it needs to get to whoever's sort of constructing it for you ahead of time. You may not have your team ready yet. But if this building isn't built yet, and whoever the developer is really serious about getting you in there, you know, they're going to need to make some concessions. They need to let their structural engineers and design team know now that that's what you need. So yeah, even like we were saying, you know, get your team in place early. You may have to get your team in place earlier than, you know, even the building exists, in order for you to convey the right information to you know, whoever your landlord partner, your development partner at that point is, to make sure that you're not getting locked into something that's just going to be, you know, that you're going to be fighting with.
Yeah,
I'm not sure if that answered the question or not.
I think that you got there. And I will also note, you know, in Virginia, at least, it's important to understand the rules when it comes to licensing and different producer categories under the same roof. We had a webinar with a former ABC agent, Kevin Anderson, a few months ago, and this question came up, and there has to be a clear demarcation between spaces. So it's not single production floor. It doesn't have to be a full demising wall, but it has to be more than tape on the ground. So like sort of disaggregating the streams. And certainly when it comes to the service side, since distilled spirits are handled differently than all other alcohol categories here. So, you know, you have to set up, if you're going to be retailing on site, you have to have an ABC store embedded in your property, and go from there. So kind of making sure that you're able to do what you want to do. You don't set up your facility in a way where you can't actually sell the spirits because of this other. So
yeah, I mean, under one roof is one thing. To make those, you know, like a distillery that has a bar function in it, you're going to need some kind of, you need the like distilling premises separation, which in some places is the tape on the ground, and in some places is, you know, full height partitions, and you know, depending on square footages, you know, you run into whether or not you need to have demised fire separations, you know, for those areas. And then, you know, then you just run into some things where you're like, well, are you milling grain on site? I mean, is it a hazard because you've got
combustibles, yeah,
explosives? I mean, it's basically it's explosives. And you know, how you're separating those out. So all that can happen under one, you know, singular roof, just with very careful planning of how you've got your fire separations. Then understanding that you're not going to have just an open concept for everything. You're going to have to make some you have to carve it up in some way to make sure that happens.
Yeah. So engaging a firm that understands the industry, that knows, even if they don't have the answers at hand, know where to turn for the right answer, so that you're not going to wind up setting up a facility that's not workable, because that does happen.
And
just
flow of spaces is important too.
Yeah.
Anybody can just draw lines on the you know, floor plan, and knowing that you need to go from one to the other and make that efficiently, and that you have to cross through, and, you know, sort of got you know, raw things in and finish things going out in a nice system, is important too. Not just sort of making a Russian nesting doll of spaces that you can't get out of.
Yeah, workable is important too, right? It's not just like technically permissible, but also workable. That's a big part of this. So just to cycle back around to some of these the kind of dichotomies that I mentioned, owners versus renters, I think you touched on a little bit. Obviously, slightly different math in terms of if you own the building and the types of work that you might want to do on it versus if you're just renting. Do you have any thoughts on that?
You've got to have that 10-year. It's hard to do, but you got to think about where you're going in 10 years, because you may just, you know, pick up and move to a different facility. You can do that easier if it's smaller, you're trying to move the, the mothership, like we're kind of talking about. The likelihood of you finding 50,000 square feet in the middle of DC is not very. You're competing for retail space with like big box retail like Target at that point, right?
Mhm.
Your production facility gets to a certain size where, well, one, you're not going to like the cost per square foot, because that's what the market demands for something that's of that size. Is, they're trying to put retailers like, CVS and that kind of thing into retail that's that
Mhm.
square footage. So maybe renting is fine if you're sitting in 5,000 square feet or something like that. You can get yourself established if you're not already established, and then think about how you expand to a different facility where you just maybe that original location, because it's known, everyone knows where you are, you've got that brand established in the neighborhood, that just kind of turns into a tap room or something for you. It just, ends up kind of, turning into a, maybe it has a bigger food, part of the program. You kind of take where you were brewing or whatever, and put a commercial kitchen in it or something like that. And
Yeah.
still retain the identity that you have, and just kind of continue leasing that, and just make it sort of the outpost for where your actual production is happening, in a larger capacity somewhere else. Maybe that's not interesting to you, and you just need to size up. So like 10 years, we're going to go from 100 barrels to 100,000 barrels. And you're just like, you're going out into the into the counties somewhere to do
Yeah.
that, which is fine. There's nothing wrong with that, right? So think about what that process of growth looks like, and where you think you're going to actually need to make that jump. Maybe you got a good deal on a big building that you're going to grow into over the next 10 or 15 or 20 years. That's a reason to probably purchase, if you can, for the same reasons that we want to talk about. Have that equity in your facility, or you're like, I'm not going to get to that size. I've got no interest in getting big enough that InBev's going to come knock on my door and tell me when to stop writing the zeros on the check. That's the other model too. I mean, if you only need to get into it for a limited amount of time until you can make something that a larger producer wants to come by and kind of buy your brand. Yeah, I mean, that is another model. I mean, we don't like talking about it, but it's a model. I mean, it's a way of doing it.
I think it all drives towards the point of saying, like, of course, it's hard to anticipate the future. This industry moves very quickly. The kind of rules are reset very often, but having an understanding of, not only your vision for the company, even pre-launch companies, but saying, well, what's my end goal here? Is it to be, a company that will outlive me? It'll, 20 years on, it'll be a regional mainstay. Are you looking to be sold? Do you want to transition it? So thinking about, what is that space, something that you're going to own or rent, and making sure that you're designing and building with all that in mind. There's horizons in all of this. If it's this space is only going to be, we're going to rent it for 10 years and then grow into a more large scale production facility. Well, maybe you're going to make sure you're building in a way that gives you some runway on the back end. So keep all that in mind. I mean, the only guarantee is that your projections are not going to be how it happens, but at least having some sense of, hey, given whatever comes our way, this is what we're hoping to achieve, and building with that all that in mind.
And I would, growing is not necessarily growing capacity, and the way that has been is that you got into making cider because you love cider and you like making cider, so cidery. You have all this space. You're only open for, your tap room's only open the tasting room, whatever it is, you're only open for 3 days a week, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, or something like that. And you're doing production the other 4 days. But it also leaves you with a lot of space because apples are seasonal. You're trying to do, maybe some some production of, some other beverage that kind of makes up the difference. But geez, somebody wants to rent out your big facility that's basically sitting empty when apples aren't, harvest season, to have, rent it for an event, and everybody likes kind of being in those spaces and having, steel pot still or whatever next to you, and so then you end up becoming kind of this event space, so accidentally. And then, well, we can open up 5 days a week, and we actually start getting like a late night crowd. Everyone starts wanting some food. So that's usually what happens. So trying to figure out, do we go the food truck way? How do we do that? How do we get them off the street so that they can serve later than what's allowed by the jurisdiction? Maybe we open up a kitchen in there, that could help with our event space. All right, well, now we're kind of a restaurant and an event space. And then we want, then somebody closes it. Obviously they want, you have a wedding, somebody has a live band. Like, okay, we're going to buy a PA maybe for this band. We could do this more often. Now we're a performance venue, and we're a kitchen, and we're a restaurant, we're a kitchen, full service, and we are an event space. I just wanted to make cider. How do we, how all of a sudden I am doing all of these other things, and I just liked apples, right? And so that's kind of like the give a mouse a cookie, ask for a glass of milk sort of thing that happens with kind of makerspace, craft beverage spaces like this. Is you have space, and that's an asset for you in other ways than just how do I make a product. Thinking about that ahead of time is as much as you can ahead of time is critical, because some of those things you're not going to be allowed to do. Some of those things are going to take up space that may start to encroach on your actual production. Like, well, I'd like to get a canning line, but every Saturday we've got somebody here getting married. That kind of becomes a logistical problem for you. So I guess my point is, like, when you're thinking about your growth, it's not always necessarily like I'm up in my barrels every year by 10. It's like, oh, we have other ways of revenue generation that could be viable here. Kind of think about what those are, what those could be.
Yeah, working with a firm to build in some adaptability in that space. It's important, right? You're never going to have straight linear growth. If you find additional revenue streams, if you branch out into different products, right? All of those things, having that space be functional now, but kind of something that you can grow into. You don't want to wind up locking yourself into even something as straightforward as, well, how are you lining up your fermenters? How are you lining up your tanks? Yeah, you're going to have to run glycol overhead. So does it make sense to, run that glycol do the whole floor plan all at once because of the cost associated with that? And well, then all of a sudden you're marking space for production. So thinking through all of these things, we're talking through it with an expert, really, really important. And that brings me to the sort of the next question here about when companies are kind of getting into this space, whether it's a new company, kind of a new facility, or even a rehab, who are some other partners besides firms like yours that companies should be engaging kind of early on, like some complementary services, people that you might work shoulder to shoulder with?
I mean, the first person is probably your attorney.
Yeah.
Hopefully before you've even got me, you know who that is. Because zoning law and liquor license and liquor laws are all, especially here, it's different from jurisdiction to jurisdiction, county to county. And then, West Virginia is not that far either, right? So we're not just talking about the D, the M, and the V, Delaware and West Virginia, and even to that extent, Pennsylvania are kind of in this range, right? So it really is a heavy mechanical, electrical, and plumbing engineering typology, if you will. What you're doing is extremely intensive for MEP engineering. Having someone who has either familiarity with some kind of facility, or specifically whatever it is that you're doing, especially if it's a distillery and you have boilers and you're talking, you got to have somebody who talks the language of steam jackets and all the different, explosion proof electrical outlets. And we can't have them 18 inches off the ground because that's, so you will run into some issues if you just go with somebody whose familiarity is single family houses, and you try to kind of use them for the big show of a production facility. Structural obviously is a big deal because we're talking about heavy things. That's all kind of depends on the building. Pad sites don't really have much of that issue. Got a huge, facility with a loading bay and a high capacity slab on grade. You're probably not talking to an engineer that much, structural engineer. I mean, the rest of it is all kind of depends on your model. How much AV and IT needs do you have? Want to have host concerts, or something like that. There's that needs. Security is always going to be an issue. Having somebody on board that knows what you need and where it's needed, making sure that the product doesn't walk off. The bar itself, or however you're serving, I guess. Food service equipment designers are very helpful. Not always necessary, depending on the sort of scale that you're going for. If it's a commercial kitchen, absolutely you have to have somebody, even if it's Trimark or Singer. These are these equipment manufacturers. They often have they have in-house designers that if you promise to buy 90% of your equipment from them, then they'll give you $6,000 worth of free design services, because it's sort of built that into the cost of all of your equipment that you buy from them. And that's a reasonable way of going, and it is that service is sort of available to you through where you're buying your equipment. And if it's kitchen equipment, it may be that you need somebody who really can talk the language of food production to design the kitchen, to know that everything on this menu is fried and you only have one fryer. That's going to be an issue. Like you're just not going to be able to get mozzarella sticks out there to people fast enough. So those are all critical people to have, but it all depends on what you're
what you're hoping to achieve.
What you're hoping to achieve. Graphics, web, marketing, product design, all that needs to get knitted together. There's one-stop shops for that. There are also very successful companies that just had their teenage daughter design their logo for them, and that's fine too. Those are great.
So if a company
know where you can get those those people, maybe without having to go to a professional service for it.
So if a company is in, there's a question came in about opening, somebody who's looking to do a purchase land and build a new structure in a rural farm brewery setting. If they engage with a company like yours, obviously you're not doing everything, right? Anybody who says they do everything, it's always a little bit nerve-wracking unless they're massive and they have all of that different talent. But if they engage with a firm like yours, would you be able to coordinate with other partners, like you have a general contractor type, or if you have other parts are sort of is it safe to assume that, they work with someone like you can help identify the other needed partners?
Yeah, that's we don't, our core, this is talking core now, not just like we as architects. Um, we do what we do. We like to have really good specialists at all those other things that we just talked about, so we don't have to be specialists in everything. That said, you just like the other person that you need on that team probably as soon as you can is your general contractor, or at least someone who can do some estimating for you. And then maybe you don't really want to deal with contract language and all that jazz. A project, you can hire a project manager, just will manage that. They'll manage bids, they'll manage contracts with all the different team members that you have and all these different consultants. They'll have a great sense of who you have. Hopefully, if they're good, they'll have a great sense of who you have on board that's correct and not correct based on your model too. We work with them all the time, right? We're sort of all part of the team. So CORE kind of works where we are sort of facilitating between all of those different parties in the team. There are one-stop shop places out there, the Walmarts that want to do your graphics and they want to do your food service design and they want to do your architecture and design and everything else. You have to think about it in the sense of, well, am I just getting whatever they've got, or you can diversify a lot more if you've got all of these sort of different constituent parties that you can plug in, make something different. Than if you kind of went to the ones you go to Walmart, you only get like whatever Walmart has. Like you can't go get like Gap jeans at Walmart or something.
Right. They're selling their solution. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, right, exactly. So if you want to sort of mix and match and go a little bit deeper, more creative, maybe you don't. Maybe you just say, I gotta get somebody in here to just like do this so that I can open immediately and or whatever. Maybe you're laundering money. I don't know. You gotta I gotta spend money now. Like I gotta get it spent.
Yeah. I mean, there are plenty of plug and play models out there if you're following a very kind of standard issue production model. Great.
Yeah.
That's fine for you. But especially these days, and this actually gets to a couple of questions that came in that asking sort of about the form, the character aspect of this, not just the function of it, but this gets to somebody asked about creating character of a space, the sort of having rooftop areas that keeping like attractive, the attractiveness to the customers, that kind of side of things. So kind of beyond just is this space workable? Well, what about a space that's also appealing, a place that people want to go to? How does that kind of get factored into the equation?
Yeah, it's funny because most of the conversation you end up having is the function part of it.
Yeah.
53 minutes of function and talk about form for the last 7. It's another part of that initial conversation as to like what, and this is our job, is to really draw out those things that maybe you hadn't thought about with regards to design. And it's not always like, what style do you want? It's a little bit more of like the kind of customer you're attracting, where does that kind of fit within your larger brand? You've probably already got graphics and you already know what your sort of feel and this gestalt of your brand is. We try to enhance that. We try and take that identity and make sure that when you're walking in the door, you're maybe not engulfed in it. Not doesn't have to be Disneyland, right? It doesn't have to be like just go find your brand logo like on different things or something like that. Complete the whatever that it can be as simple as just walking in and seeing the production right away. I mean, it's the thing that the layperson kind of gets excited about going to a makerspace for, is because it's different than just going to a bar or restaurant. There's stuff happening. You want to be close to it, and gosh, you just spent all that money on a copper still that there's only copper on the outside. Why not look at it? We try to find some ways that's synergistic, where the things that are exciting about a production space get exhibited as being a production space. gone on a lot of, done a lot of research in, not just in DC, but there's distilleries we've gone to where you walk in, there's a tasting room, you don't see anything. A tasting room could have just been anywhere.
Yeah.
You didn't get to see Willy Wonka's factory, then why am I there? Like, I'm just,
Mhm.
somebody's just holding the bottle and showing me, telling me what to taste. That could happen anywhere. So, I would encourage, or at least I think that encouraging that, that component of seeing production, seeing the grit or the
Mhm.
production part of it is part of why people go to these types of
Yeah.
spaces. So, but again, it's all like part of what are the assets of the building? What is the building giving you? And
Mhm.
how this was sort of our mantra with Cotton Reed was, don't fight the building. You don't have a lot of money to spend on this thing. You're only talking about 3,500 square feet. They had a still that they had bought before they even had a space, a lease signed on it. The still was higher than the ceiling. There's a 17-foot still with the gin hat on it and the 14-foot ceiling. And so we figured out that we could put it in this old elevator shaft, and it sort of went up into the elevator shaft, and then we didn't have to fight the structure so much. We didn't have to carve up this old warehouse, and it just so lined up with, we kind of made it align with the door. So you walk in, and the first thing you see is the still. We just lit it up really nicely, and sort of everything around the floor plan just kind of revolved around that, and ended up being very efficient, but also just very straightforward in its design. We didn't have to do a lot of bells and whistles. It was just,
Yeah.
it's kind of like, let's just sort of be in this kind of gritty space. If you can use those to your advantage, you spend less money on the decor part of it, which maybe you have a lot of, everybody's budgets are different. I'm not telling you don't spend a lot of money on the decor, and it's something we like to do, right?
Yeah.
Pick out expensive stuff, but you don't have to go overboard with it. If you're really dead set on having a rooftop bar or garden or something, you've got to know that before you sign a lease.
Mhm.
You could be in for a lot of structural upgrades just to get the capacity to have assembly space on a roof. That will preclude some buildings that you're looking at. If you're doing it, ground up, that's great. You're going to have others, just some other planning issues. You need 2 means of egress. You're going to need accessibility, so you have some kind of lift or elevator. It's not a cheap thing to do, but it's certainly something that if it's meaningful to your brand, or it's meaningful to the to the experience of the space, that it can be totally worth it.
Yeah. And I'll say, going through the exercise, right, as you're doing the site selection process, being able to clarify your vision for your brand, right, your brand identity, building that into the space. So you walk in and before you see any logos, where you're at. That exercise, right, translating that from your head to someone like Christopher here, to be able to say, like, I'm looking for a space to do this for me. This is the feel I want. I want it to be a kind of a party vibe, or I want it to be more relaxing, or whatever the case may be. Here's the aesthetic that I'm going for. That's going to be helpful outside of just your direct space, that you're like, there's hey, it needs to work for us, but I also want this experience out of it. That's going to be helpful also for clarifying your unique value proposition in the marketplace, right?
Yeah.
So we are the cozy brand, right? We are we make really comforting spirits that end of a tough day, you put on your crushed velvet robe and you sit in your wingback chair and you hear that's who we are.
Yeah.
The space will speak to that. It's going to be all cohesive. So there's a lot to tackle at once. Of course, you can't possibly do it all in one go, but all of the sort of things that you're thinking about of what your brand is relative to others should be conveyed in the user experience when they walk through that door. And people like Christopher are here to help for that.
Yeah,
So,
we like to call it co-creating. If you just want somebody to just like make something and kind of bring it back to you, you don't want to be involved, then there are places for that. But we excel at how to create with you and ask the right questions so that we make something at the end of the day that everybody can be proud of.
Yeah. Well, and there's lots of technical questions to get into here. Of course, somebody had a question about floor finishes, which I have sat through an hour-long webinar on floor finishes. There's lots of information that's out there. Working with the experts in that space, I will say join your trade associations if you're able to. They have, I'll say my background is beer, so I'll say the Brewers Association has at least, I think there's a whole book on sort of like the finishes and some of the just flooring issues. There's whole chapters. So lots of information out there. Feel free to reach out to me and I can connect you with more resources, and do not be shy about reaching out to Christopher if you are looking for any expertise in this space. And we have reached the top of our hour here. This went very quickly. Obviously we could have gone for a whole nother hour, but I really appreciate everyone joining us. Thank you for your insights, Christopher, and thank you all for joining us. And I will say each month we host a new session in our craft beverage conversation series. So we'll have the information about next month's edition very soon.
I'd also like to thank everyone for attending. Thank you, Christopher and Chris. You will receive an email with a link to the recording and the slides following this presentation. We also will have a short survey attached to that email. If you could help us improve our sessions by filling that out, we would appreciate it. If you would like to sign up for upcoming webinars or access recorded webinars, please visit virginiasbdc.org/training. These resources are designed to be used in collaboration with your local SBDC advisors. You can sign up for a free and confidential session by emailing help@virginiasbdc.org or visiting our website. Thank you all for attending, and I hope to see you at our next session. Take care.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye.
Thank you.